call me Ishmael, but in all seriousness, call me Julia. These are the first words that begin the epic of Moby Dick. Now, if you remember the end of my last book review, the book looked a lot different at that point, and that's because it was a completely different book. I like my book to have a little bit more personality to it. Here, it looks more like a right whale, or maybe a blue whale, and I can't even see the face on it most of the time. This is the cover of Moby Dick. You see Captain Ahab just insane with his revenge to kill Moby Dick, and then just blood spewing from his blowhole, just like he wants to happen in his depraved imagination. Alright, well. So the basic plot, I think everybody probably knows it at this point, but here's the basic summary. So the main character, Ishmael, he is a school teacher, but whenever he starts to get rather antsy, he always likes to return to the ocean. He has done so on numerous occasions, for merchant ships, for warships, and just about every other kind of marine-like endeavor, except for whaling. So, at the time, the whaling capital of the world was Nantucket. It's an island just off the coast of Massachusetts. In order to get there, though, you gotta take a boat from Massachusetts to get to Nantucket, and by the time Ishmael got there, he had to wait a day or two anyway. So he found refuge at a really old inn because he's on a budget. He can't afford a really fancy inn. They're full up, but the innkeeper, Mr. Coffin, I believe his name is, says that he has a room if you're willing to share the room with somebody else. Now, who this other person is a complete mystery. Until that night, Ishmael basically gives up on waiting for him when he comes in. What Ishmael sees is something he would have never thought of in his wildest dreams. It is I guess maybe Aboriginal would be the right term, from New Zealand, covered head to toe in tattoos, where it gives him an appearance of looking like he's purple all over, and he has a weird crop of hair, and he has these odd little rituals. Obviously, this person is a little frightened that some random person just kind of went into his bed, so there's a bit of a fuss. Ishmael is just terrified while Queequeg, that's the name of the Aboriginal, is ready to strew him up with his tomahawk, which he was also smoking out of just a few minutes earlier. So the innkeeper comes in, and he speaks his sort of broken English that this Aboriginal knows very well. The situation is explained, and one very awkward night is spent. The boat to Nantucket is a few days more wait. So in this time, Ishmael and Queequeg form a pretty good relationship with each other, to a point where Queequeg even does a little ceremony to marry them, which in his country just basically means they're best friends. He even gives a little backstory. Apparently, he would have been the prince of his island nation, but he wanted to learn the ways of the white man. And so, he became a harpooner on a whaling vessel, and he's made quite a career of it. Now, the boat to Nantucket arrives, and the innkeeper recommends that they go to this one particular inn in Nantucket because they have a fantastic clam chowder. They have both kinds, the red kind and the white kind. Queequeg and Ishmael try it out, and yeah, this clam chowder is something to go for. But the thing I like is, so the waitress comes by and says, "So which one do you want?" To which Ishmael just says red. And then waitress just yells into the kitchen, "One order of red." To which Ishmael's just like, I wonder. "One order of white." And so then they bring about another thing of chowder. Both of them eat like 3 helpings of chowder in this scene. I don't know what it is, but there's just something about this part of the book I really liked. It's like the idea of 2 friends being in a weird neighborhood, but just surveying all the local customs and just loving everything that's happening. Now comes the business of finding a vessel that will take him. Now, what's rather interesting is one of the vessels is named like the Hellhound or the Devil's Minion or something like that. And I'm not necessarily superstitious, but I feel like naming a ship that is just all kinds of bad luck. So Ishmael goes around looking for a particular ship when he eyes the Pequod. This seems like a pretty standard ship, kind of an old world charm in the idea that it's a lot older than most of the other ships, but yet still just as sturdy and ready to fight as all the other ones. The only real problem with this ship is the mysterious Captain Ahab. Very little is known about this guy, and there's just so many rumors that grow on taller down the line as Ishmael talks to all the townfolk. So the thing is, we never really meet Captain Ahab until like a good ways into the voyage. And as Ishmael explains, this is kind of customary. The captain doesn't really need to be on deck because the crew knows how to take care of all the masts and everything. And there we see Captain Ahab is just a really rough-looking character. It's a pretty good depiction of him on the cover, although he's described as having gray hair and that looks like black hair. But the idea that he looks like he's carved out of a piece of old hickory with just scars of all kind, that is what the cover definitely depicts the best. The main feature about this Captain Ahab is that he only has one leg. The other was torn off in their last expedition to find a mythical whale known as Moby Dick. He is a whale that several people have been after for years now. In fact, they say if you find him, there are just harpoon upon harpoon stabbed into him, but yet he's still swimming around perfectly fine. And he's also rather smart. Apparently, he took down a ship or two in his time. So, in the last voyage, this whale took off Ahab's leg. And as such, he has just been crazed with revenge ever since. There is mention as well that there was kind of a bout of gangrene, and that was the main reason he didn't show up right away. But the idea that he was so fuming from revenge, I think, works just as well. Now, as a bit of motivation, Captain Ahab takes out a gold coin from his pocket, a doubloon, Spanish gold, and says, "Whoever spots the white whale will get this coin." And then he hammers it to the mast of the ship. Now, if you ever seen that one episode of SpongeBob called Clams, it is very much an homage to that. Especially the idea of Mr. Krabs hammering up the last sandwich, as well as just being completely obsessed about the creature for stealing something that was very important to him. Now, this unfortunately is where the book just goes downhill hard. At this point, for every chapter there is of storytelling, there's 5 of regulations, the history of whaling, all species of whales, the types of ships, what the rigging is, and just everything. It reminds me a lot of Frank Herbert's Dune, where he just stuffs in so much world building that most of the time he forgets to tell the story, which the whole time I'm reading it, I'm just like, I don't care that white is a very specific color. I want to see this man's internal struggle trying to keep his sanity while also hard driving trying to get this whale. And that is more touched upon in other media I've seen than in this book. Which is sad because this is the source. So the basic story from there. The whaling expedition lasts for about 3 years. During that time, Queequeg gets severely ill, and as his dying request, he wants a coffin made for him. Afterwards, the coffin is made by the mysterious carpenter, who has way too much backstory, as well as the blacksmith. I don't care! So the coffin is made, and Queequeg is happy. Unfortunately, though, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, this coffin gives him the motivation to live, and he all of a sudden gets better like that. So they just have this coffin on board, and it's like, what are we supposed to do with this thing? So the carpenter nails the lid shut, caulks the outside, and it becomes a life buoy. Kind of ironic, life buoy would be a coffin, a symbol associated with death, but I think that's supposed to be a bit ironic in some way. Along the way, they do take out a few whales, which for some odd reason Herman thinks are fish. And during one of their expeditions, we see Ahab kind of has his secret service, so to speak. An army of Farsi, as they call them. I'm going to guess that just means that they celebrate Islam or they're Persian. There's kind of a mixed bag of what these people are supposed to be. One of them is a fortune teller, while all the other ones are just drones. They're fantastic workers. They help steer Captain Ahab's boat without flinching in any sort of way, and also having a bit more energy than most of the other people on board. Now, this Fidela character, everybody thinks that he is the devil incarnate, because I guess he looks really old. He only has like 3 teeth through his name, and the idea that he's a fortune teller kind of makes it seem like he sold his soul for this power. So Fidela's prophecy is that on the day Ahab will die, Fidela will have gone before him, and there will be 2 hearses that he will see before a rope kills him in some way. Obviously, Ahab takes this as he's probably going to be hanged, but the idea of seeing 2 hearses out at sea, how's that going to happen? And then the other thing as well is on the day he would die is that after Fidela was gone, he would somehow come back to see Ahab again. So, they're into the voyage, just off the Sea of Japan, when they see the mystical white whale. Now, as for that doubloon I mentioned earlier, nobody claimed it except for Ahab himself. So, as a way to kind of entice the sailors a little more, he said, whoever spots the whale on the day Moby Dick is killed will get the coin. So that way there's a bit more fairness to it. So, they have 3 days, which, knowing the heavy Christian symbolism, I'm sure is another sign of sort. There is this hot pursuit for the white whale. The first day, a few harpoons get into him, but nothing really too extravagant happens. The second day, more harpoons are gotten into, but unfortunately all the rope to be able to pull the whale back after it dies, or just to get the harpoon back in general. They get very tangled up in such a way. That day, Captain Ahab notices that Fidela has gone missing. He starts to get a little nervous about the 3rd day of pursuit of the white whale. Now, on that 3rd day, obviously Moby Dick is quite annoyed that somebody keeps shoving sharp objects into him. So he is full-on revenge mode. But before that, the body of the whale comes out of the water. And there, strewn across all the harpoons and the lines from the day before, you see Fidela's corpse. Just like he predicted. And Ahab starts to get a little nervous. He says that had to be the first hearse, because it was carrying poor Fidela. So there's a little bit of action here and there. Another harpoon or 2 gets in the Moby Dick. And this enrages him even more to the point where he starts going after the Pequod itself. He takes it down, and that was the second hearse. Because there was not any person on that ship that survived. Being stranded out in the ocean with just a few rowboats as well as his elite team, he figures he just has to go for it. He uses his spear one more time in vain, but unfortunately, the ropes tangle around again to the point where they grab him by the neck, snap it to the point of hanging him, and then he goes deep underwater to the shock of all the Farsi people. Now that was another thing I forgot to mention as well, so this harpoon that Captain Ahab made was rather special. It was made from a whole bunch of horse nails that got melted down. I think it was the idea that it was something really tough in the idea that it was pure steel, as it would be really sharp. Now usually after the metal is melted, it has to be tempered, which basically means you dunk it in a bottle of some sort of liquid to make it cool, and then that helps harden it into shape. This time around, it's very different. So all the harpooners of the ship all donate a little bit of blood to put into that cup, and that is what they temper the harpoon with. And then for the shaft itself, it's made out of a piece of old hickory, which hickory is a really strong type of wood. So Ahab is dead, and only those handful of people on the boats are there. But unfortunately, the giant swirling vortex of the sinking ship gets everybody else except for one person, Ishmael. In an ironic twist, it was the coffin that saved his life. He straddled on the ocean for a few days before he was picked up by another ship. And, well, that's the story. What I find rather interesting is in the abridgment, there is a mention that Ishmael was rather thankful at the coffin. It was like Quake, even in death, still watching over Ishmael the whole time. I find it amazing that wasn't in the actual book. So yeah, that's Moby Dick in a nutshell. In short, read the abridgment. There is way too much fat in here. I am not going to go on a whaling expedition. I am not a zoologist. I do not need to know all this stuff. Do not tell me the backstory of every single character on this boat. It's not going to help anything. Especially knowing they're all going to die in the end, so what was the point of all that? And that's really the worst part about it, though, is when the story is actually being told, it's really great. It's suspenseful. It's interesting. There's foreshadowing. Here it felt more like I was reading an encyclopedia. And wow, was I ever glad to be done with this one. Now, sometimes if a book is good, I might think about rereading it. This one, I'm just going to stick with the abridgment. I still get the epic story, but none of that fat that just completely ruins the experience, destroys the pace, and quite frankly, it's just not necessary. So yeah, that's my feelings on Moby Dick. Now, I know it's held in very high esteem when it comes to scholars. The idea that there's a lot of symbolism in here. And the character being a hardcore Presbyterian, there is a lot of religious imagery as well. There's references to the Bible as well as other works. But in terms of a flowing narrative, keep looking. One of the things that should have probably told me how this story was going to go is this page right here. Just kind of hold it up so you can read it. Now, for those of you that don't know who Nathaniel Hawthorne is, probably his most famous work is The Scarlet Letter. This is the only classic that I ever read. I got about halfway through, and I said, I'm not doing this. I'm not reading it. Because it's written in a 16th century tongue, so it's really hard to understand. It is just overall boringly descriptive. I mean, the first chapter takes up about 10 pages, describes a prison cell, and the person of the Scarlet Letter. That's it. Nothing happens. So that should have been my first clue, that it was going to be a little bit of a rough experience. Which, the first few chapters, it was a little wordy, but it was still interesting. They were going on some fun adventures. And then they get on the boat. And that's about it until the end. So, I hope you'll join me next time for one book I'm really looking forward to. Ian's last book, Anthem. Now, I do know that she wrote a few other non-fiction books, but I want to stick to the fiction stuff for now. Now, what's rather humorous is that this is a signet book, which just about all the other books of Ian's work I have were also by signet. So it was kind of crazy that this actually fit my collection. Even though I broke down and bought this brand new at Barnes & Noble's. Now maybe that's another thing I should mention. When I picked up Moby Dick, I got these at thrift stores. This one for like $1 and this one for like $2.50. This was $12. I would have much preferred to pick it up for a much cheaper price, like probably at the thrift store if I could have found it. It would have been probably like, I don't know, 50 cents the most. But rest assured, this one is probably going to go a lot quicker than Moby Dick did. Because first of all, look at the thickness. And you can also see that the pages aren't too crazy either. Now, the thing that's going to be fun about this is this is the last book I have by Ein that I haven't finished yet. And then I have another one here afterwards I'm going to read, Animal Farm by George Orwell. It'll be fun to compare these authors. Both of them hate communism, but for very different reasons. George Orwell hates communism because for him socialism is the pure and just system, and communism is the complete butchering of all those ideals. For Ein, she hates communism because she grew up in a communist regime and has always thought that laissez-faire capitalism was the best way to do things. And plus, let's be honest, communism and her ideals do not match. Her ideals is more the individual, Orwell's is more the group. So it's very interesting to see how both of these authors can agree as well as disagree. I hope you'll join me next time for those two reviews. Until then, keep having fun.